let me ask you, what did the Blackhawks? Is this? Did they announce tank? Is the tankathon on?
Yeah, this is about as full-scale rebuild as it gets, right? Like, I don't think there's – obviously, Kyle Davidson, when he took over as the general manager in March, made it pretty clear that this was going to be a longer-term project and it was going to be a rebuild. But I think yesterday was basically the realization of the magnitude of this rebuild, and it certainly feels, like you mentioned in the open, that it's going to be more of a 5-year plan as opposed to a 2 to 3 year little retool here. So, yeah, lots of moves obviously happened, chaotic day. And Kyle Davidson basically said it like yesterday. He's like, we had to change things. Like, what, obviously these last few years of them kind of just spinning their tires in no man's land really wasn't working. And the fact that they haven't made the playoffs, I'm not counting the bubble. The fact that they haven't made the playoffs in 5 years or haven't won a playoff series since the 2015 Stanley Cup final, and they still have one of the shallowest pipelines in the league is like pretty inexcusable. So I think yesterday was just an opportunity for them to really just try to restock their pipeline and collect as many future assets in the form of draft capital as possible.
I get that, Charlie, and I do think it was a monumental day and a huge land shift in all the language that Kyle Davidson used to describe it. I get that, and I understand trading for the goalie, Mrazek from the Leafs. And I even get giving up on Kirby Dach and kind of swapping him out with another center with Frank Nazar in your system now. Getting rid of DeBrincat at 24 years old, I have a problem with, only because I don't think, number one, you got enough in return. You didn't get a player and the pick. You didn't get a prospect that was NHL ready or close to being NHL ready. And I think that you also, when you have a rebuild, you've got to build around somebody. And you could have easily justified, in my view, building around him. So they made 3 big moves yesterday. I was okay with 2 of them, but the third one, I don't have the faith in this organization, this front office, to say I give them the benefit of that doubt.
Yeah, and that's fair to look at the Alex DeBrincat return and feel a little underwhelmed by it. And I think if you put the Blackhawks on a lie detector test, that they would probably agree with you that they would have hoped to get a little bit more. Now, I will say this, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but I want to put this into perspective. I think it was going to be hard for the Blackhawks to get 100 cents on the dollar for Alex DeBrincat if there wasn't an immediate contract extension in place with the team acquiring him. Like, the reason the Blackhawks got so much for Seth Jones last summer is because they knew they already had an 8-year extension in place, so they were willing to give up those 2 first-rounders and Adam Boquist to really make the deal happen. So I want to put that in perspective, but also I know Kyle Davidson said yesterday too, is like they had opportunities to get multiple first-round picks for DeBrincat. The problem was that they were later in the first round, so the Blackhawks kind of valued the 7 overall pick as opposed to maybe getting a couple first-rounders to make it kind of look good on the naked eye, right? And so, but it is fair. Like, if you are, trying to trade Alex DeBrincat, you do want to get as close to 100 cents on the dollar as possible. They didn't do that, but I think if you're going to go with a full-scale rebuild, you can't. I understand having, DeBrincat, a 24-year-old kind of building block player, but I feel like you just got to tear it all down if you can't really go half in, half out with it. And the Blackhawks really kind of sent that message, like everyone was on the table.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you can't help but wonder if this is about next year, if this is about trying to make sure that Connor Bedard is available to the Blackhawks. It doesn't seem like these moves are designed to win in the right now. And I get it; it's a rebuild, but that you also have the added attraction of maybe being bad enough to be among the top 3 picks, and there are apparently 3 guys that were that are good enough, projected good enough, they would have been number 1 picks this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure that was part of the motivation too, right? Like, knowing how strong, like the 3 players that are projected to go 1, 2, and 3 in next year's draft. Like, I had a source tell me that all 3 of those players would easily go number 1 overall in this year's draft. So there are potential franchise cornerstone players in next year's draft that I'm sure the Blackhawks would be licking their chops at. But I think it was more like, I think that the motivation was more to accumulate all of these. Like, it wasn't just trading, getting the number 7 overall pick. It was getting the 13th overall pick, the 25th overall pick, and now they have 6 second and third rounders going into today because, I wrote about this late last night, but it wasn't the Blackhawks franchise didn't change when Patrick Kane. They were a huge part of when Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews were drafted at 1 and 3 overall, but it took a while for guys like Duncan Keith and Brent Seabrook and Nicholas Hjalmarsson and Dustin Byfuglien to really develop, because those guys were drafted much earlier, 2004, 2005, 2006, and they didn't really hit their peaks until the Blackhawks were winning Stanley Cups, right? So they, as much as Chicago, I'm sure, is salivating at the possibility of a guy like Connor Bedard next year who could be a franchise changer, like, they still don't have the pieces around a potential core player, right? So I think that was the motivation to kind of really restock this farm system, because outside of that, the cupboard is really bare.
So Kyle Davidson was very honest about the conversations that he's going to have now with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews. They were delayed, or maybe they were bracing them for the inevitable. But Charlie, that's the next shoe to drop, both of them likely. Maybe it'll be before the trade deadline. Maybe it'll be before the season starts. But when Kaner's agent, I think Pat Brisson still represents both guys, tells The Athletic that they're not going to make any decisions or comments at this point last night, it says a lot without saying much. Don't you expect both guys to be willing now to waive their no movement clause?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting conversation between the two players and obviously Kyle Davidson. And, I think it was telling in Patrick Kane's exit interview that they asked him, like, helping develop some of these younger guys on the roster, will it be enough to satisfy Patrick during the rebuild? And he kind of went out of his way at the end of his response to say, if DeBrincat's here, it's easier for me because it's fun to play with him. And so DeBrincat is no longer here. So they already traded one of his other favorite line mates in Artemi Panarin. And so you wonder how Patrick is going to feel about this. It feels like Jonathan Toews' situation might be a little bit more different, because Patrick, it feels like he could potentially play into his 40s. Jonathan Toews, his body has taken a real beating over these last 15, 16 years of him playing. And so you wonder, he's not going to want to sign up for this rebuild. So I think the question with Jonathan might be not whether he's back in Chicago next season. I think it's just, I think that the question is, I don't think he's going to be back after the Blackhawks this season. Or after next season, that when his contract expires. I think it's going to be, does he want out before the season starts and kind of force his way to a team to maybe take a shot at a contender?
Yeah, I agree with the difference between the two guys. But I also wonder, what are they doing with this? They got a goalie now, but it's a guy that will surrender 3 goals a game, apparently, right? So that was the trade that kind of, if you didn't already know when you're trading away a 24-year-old all-star and then a 21-year-old guy with experience, when you take on a goalie that's bound to lose for you, doesn't that indicate that this is one way to ensure you don't win?
Well, I think, too, it obviously allowed them to kind of move from the second round to the first round. And so it was part of the motivation to really, go after a guy that they maybe wanted at number 25 overall. But I think more importantly, Mrazek's got 2 years left on his contract, and the Blackhawks are not going to be a very good hockey team over these next couple of seasons. So you don't want to bring one of your younger goaltenders from Rockford. Like, Arvid Soderblom had a terrific season in Rockford, but you don't want to bring him up and kind of subject him to the quality of chances that Chicago is going to give up next season and kind of wreck the psyche of a young goaltending prospect. Like, you're going to need a veteran to kind of shoulder some of those bad losses and get them through some trying times. I think Peter Mrazek, he's 30 years old. He's been around the league. He's not necessarily going to steal you games and kind of prevent them from, maybe getting a higher pick. So I think that was the thinking there, in acquiring a veteran goaltender, because they don't have, they didn't have a single goaltender signed under contract for next season prior to yesterday. Like, they needed 2 goalies, so it was smart of them to get a veteran in there, and then maybe you can kind of fill out that backup with a younger goalie.
Charlie, got to ask this because it's obviously, They wanted to go in this direction. Tanking is the way that pro sports works often. But how much of this was motivated by cost-cutting measures, and how much of this was motivated? Okay, you look at Alex DeBrincat, that's a salary dump as well. He's going to make $9 million. You don't have to pay that now. I don't think the Hawks are going to be close to spending up to the cap. You look at, throughout the organization, there's some slashing of jobs. There's a lot of very budget-conscious organization, more so than it used to be. Was that any part of this motivation? Did that drive this move toward going down this road quicker than they might have?
I don't know if actual dollars might have made the Blackhawks or maybe motivated them to make these moves. I think it was more so, Kyle Davidson has been on the record saying, like, we want financial flexibility on the cap, right? And if you're going into a rebuild, you don't want a ton of money tied up. They already have $9.5 million a year for the next 8 years to Seth Jones. And then, Alex DeBrincat's probably going to get somewhere in the $9 million range too. So I don't know if they wanted to allocate that money to two top guys before the rebuild even starts, right? So I think that's what, the thinking there was. And also, like, with these moves yesterday, like, if Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews aren't back next season, I feel like the Blackhawks are basically saying, like, we're prepared to move on without them. And those are their two big money drivers. So, like, everyone goes to the United Center, and Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, like, they're still the top selling jerseys in Chicago. So I feel like that, it might have been a little bit different, if Alex DeBrincat was here and they said, we can't alienate Patrick and Jonathan because they still sell us tickets. I think this is the Blackhawks really preparing for life without them if it gets to that point next season.
But they also both make $10 million a year. So if they move on from them, they move on from those deals as well.
Yeah, but their actual cash drops to like $5.5 million. Like, it's really weird the way the NHL salaries work. Like, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, their salaries were really front loaded. So I think the actual cash that they are owed is $5.5 million. But yeah, your point is noted though, because even when they get new deals, like, Patrick Kane's not going to be a $5 million player. Like, he's going to be, he's probably going to get in the, like, Alex Ovechkin is like 36 years old. He just got a 5-year deal at, I think it was like $8.59 million. Like, Patrick Kane could easily command that too.